Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 3rd of December, and as always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. You can do that by heading to our website anytime at weather.gov/Alaska or calling 1-800-472-0391. As always, if you have questions about what you're finding tonight on Alaska weather or any of the maps that you see or any of the website or services that you can find, feel free to call me or certainly email me, and I'm happy to respond as quickly as I'm able. David.Snider is the easiest way to find me there at noaa.gov. Here's a look at the hazardous weather tonight, and it's pretty easy to see where the snow and the wind's going to be. That's pretty much what we're dealing with tonight. In red, let's start with high wind warnings all the way from the upper Kuskokwim into the Deltana and Tanana Flats region and the Alaska Range, including areas around Denali and north of Broad Pass. Gusts there could stretch into the 65 to 75 mile an hour range, and this will probably last from tonight all the way through most of Monday and then into Tuesday there. So gusts coming in from the south as a broad area of low pressure down to the south is pushing a lot of wind northward up over the mountains. This will probably not affect the Fairbanks region with strong gusts, but it will help to bring the temperature up a little bit. Upper 20s expected as this warming wind descends from the higher terrain. And then we're back into wind and wind-blown snow across a large part of the Yukon Delta as well as the Kuskokwim Delta into the middle and upper Yukon valleys there. Most areas will see about 1 to 3 inches of snow, maybe as much as 5 for some cases there. Some higher amounts around the Nulato Hills and the eastern sections of Norton Sound. But by and large, it's going to be a wind and snow issue for most places there. So visibility will be a factor in how this works out for your community as well. So plan on some additional snow, plan on some gusts, and plan on some poor visibility, making travel a little bit more difficult as we go ahead in the next couple of days. Now, out around St. Lawrence Island, we might see, and the western end of the Seward Peninsula, I should add, about 1 to 3 inches of snow in that area. Could see, though, as much as 9, so there's a potential for some higher variability in the amount of snow that you see. And around the southern Seward Peninsula there, a couple inches of snow will be possible as we go through the next couple days. It looks like also blowing snow, the main issue there for the Beaufort Seacoast and the western Arctic coast. We expect to see some stronger gusts with that, helping to lower visibility in the coming days. So plan on some changes again through wind and snow combined. Let's take a look at the weather maps and satellite pictures first up, and you'll notice that low pressure is working its way up across the western Gulf. With that, a pretty tight pressure gradient, as you would imagine, and thus the wind warnings that we've got across the higher terrain. A lot of warm air is working north and east with this as well, and it's been moving into a large part of southeast. Gales are up across most of the outer coast and a couple of inner coast locations, and one thing you'll notice as this front comes through is the wind should come up sharply tonight. So strong winds are certainly possible for many in southeast, and you'll notice that probably into the evening hours. Out across the west, as always, you can clearly see that cold air making that spotty speckled pattern on the satellite picture, a sign of something being drawn into this broad area of low pressure here. As this continues working its way northward, the pressure gradient will stay fairly tight over south central and southwestern Alaska tonight and tomorrow and well into the early part of the week. So this will be a kind of a long duration winter event. At 965 millibars south and west of Kodiak Island and southeast of Sand Point, you see that low pressure center there. The broad packing of the pressure gradient certainly visible on the surface chart today. Areas of rain, occasionally heavier rain as you get into Prince William Sound and Resurrection Bay there, is turning into snow as it starts to ascend the mountains and cool off a little bit more. Seeing snow reports down around southwestern Alaska and the Alaska Peninsula, but it is rain around the Kenai all the way down toward Kodiak Island and really most of southeast. The trough of low pressure is indicated by the broken black line is a place where a lot of wind is being drawn into, just like we have here at the pressure center with the low, and also across the Brooks Range where snow is falling there, and across the Arctic coast we see snow from Wainwright all the way down toward Point Hope and Point Lay this afternoon. Out across the west, one more area of low pressure at 989 millibars across the western Arctic will gradually shift eastward tonight. That could create a few areas of snow showers for the central and western Aleutians. Low pressure sitting very close to Lake Iliamna fills in a little bit more tonight to about 970 millibars. And you'll notice that we'll have a broad area of blowing snow possible all the way from the western and northern parts of the Seward Peninsula to the Brooks Range and the Beaufort Seacoast. That should be fairly widespread. For the higher terrain in places like Broad Pass, the winds will be blowing tonight, and if there's any snow on the ground, some of that could be in motion, so plan on some slowdowns there if you're traveling. We'll also expect to see a decent amount of warm air moving into Prince William Sound and the Cook Inlet region, so we're mainly going to be dealing with a rain and snow mix at lower terrain that could go back very quickly to and from as we get bursts of wind and drying conditions with the wind coming over the mountains. It does want to not only warm us up, but also reduce the amount of precipitation falling in the lee side of the mountains, at least in the very near vicinity of those mountains. And for southeast, it looks like the winds will be coming up for you. Expect that to continue as we head through tonight. Once the front moves through the region, the winds should start to settle off just a little bit more tomorrow, and colder air will start to work its way back in, so there's a chance for some snow to work its way back into the northern locations. Across the Yukon Delta, 982 millibar low now. We'll stretch a front and a trough all the way across the interior, helping to keep those winds moving all the way across south central and the higher terrain and back into the middle Tanana Valley. You'll notice up north, too, the pressure gradient remains fairly tight for your Monday. So snow and blowing snow will be a factor as we start of the week. Out west, snow showers are likely across the Aleutians. Look for periods of rain showers from Sandpoint all the way down toward Unalaska and Dutch Harbor, especially along the Pacific side. And once we get into Tuesday, another push of warmer weather works into the northern and eastern Gulf Coast. That will bring a steadier round of rainfall and probably some snow to the higher terrain. The pressure gradient is still there, so for places in the Copper Basin, all the way up toward the eastern interior, snow and blowing snow will become a little bit more of a factor, and rain and snow will continue up and down the Cook Inlet. Across southwest, some freezing rain may work its way into southwestern Alaska with this next push, so watch for some of the snow to gradually mix in with the more warm types of precipitation. And out across the northwest coast, snow and blowing snow will continue at 993 millibars. A low very close to St. Lawrence Island will be capable of dropping at least a couple inches of snow in the region, and maybe more on an isolated basis, as we talked about. The winter weather advisories continue for this region, and again with that tight pressure gradient, don't be surprised to see a general reduction in your visibility, making travel and transportation a little bit more difficult as we go into the early part and mid part of next week. Let's look at your surface weather. Let's take a look at temperatures as we get started on your Monday morning. 30s to low 40s for many in south central, lower to mid 30s for south central and Prince William Sound. I said south central over here. This is southeast, near 40 in Sitka. There you go. 36 around Kodiak, the middle Tanana Valley, about 19 in Fairbanks. As you get to 3 below around Arctic Village and Fort Yukon, about 1 below in Barrow, about 0 in Kaktovik. Kotzebue Sound temperatures will likely hold in the mid to upper teens. Around Norton Sound, we're looking at temps back in the upper 20s there. St. Lawrence Island, 29. Most of southwestern Alaska will kind of split the difference. North of the Yukon Valley, 20s. South of that, we're looking at temps closer to freezing, and you'll see above freezing temperatures for many in southwest and the Aleutians. Now by the afternoon on Monday, we expect to see highs back in the lower to mid 40s for southeast, so warming up there. Upper 30s and lower 40s for south central to about Kodiak Island. Southwest also above freezing. From the middle Tanana Valley northward, we'll probably stay in the mid to upper 20s to the teens, all the way up to the Brooks Range. Teens and 20s there out to Nome, 26 there, Unalakleet 27, 3 in Barrow, not all that cold, and 9 for a high temperature in Kaktovik on Monday. Low temperatures Tuesday morning will cool off into the mid to upper 30s for southeast, so again, not a huge range in temperatures for you in the next 24 hours or so. Upper 20s and lower 30s for many in south central. Teens for the middle Tanana Valley and points east. Northway could be colder at 3, Fort Yukon 4, 1 below and cooling down in Barrow, and single digits in teens for the Kotzebue Sound region. Nome down to 22 on Tuesday morning. Southwest, expect low temperatures in the 20s to about 30 degrees as you get into Bristol Bay. And the Alaska Peninsula and Dutch Harbor and Unalaska back in the lower to mid 30s, 31 in St. Paul, back to 36 by Tuesday afternoon. Southeast, upper 30s to mid 40s around Ketchikan and Annette, one of the warmer spots there. Looks like Portage probably closer to 42 and 38 down around Homer and Whittier. As you get into 22 around Fairbanks, 15 to Fort Yukon, 4 in Barrow.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
On to flying weather now. Look for IFR conditions across the northern Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, all the way down toward Kodiak Island and over the Barrens in south central. A widespread area of MVFR will work its way up through the Susitna Valley and up toward the Alaska Range. MVFR will be predominant across southeast on Monday morning, with areas in the south and the north also getting into IFR conditions. Out across the west, MVFR is expected up and down the YK Delta through Bristol Bay. A hit and miss area of IFR is expected. Also across the lower and middle Yukon Valley up toward Bettles, and then expecting VFR for most locations across the coastal plain, but along the coast itself, MVFR at least, and probably a better chance for IFR by early Monday morning. By Monday afternoon, of course, conditions will be worsening, it looks like, with IFR spreading out across the Chukchi and the Beaufort Seacoast and really becoming the predominant feature across St. Lawrence Island all the way into outer parts of Norton Sound, the YK Delta, and up into the Kuskokwim and the lower Yukon Valley. Look for most in south central to still be dealing with MVFR conditions, and most in southeast will at least start to see that creeping in with IFR up across Chilkoot and White Pass and some of the higher terrain around the Misty Fjords. Once we get into Tuesday morning, conditions should improve again across some parts of south and west. Watch for IFR to really focus in St. Lawrence Island, the northern Yukon Delta, Norton Sound, including Nome, and into the south-facing slopes of the central and eastern Brooks Range up across the Beaufort Seacoast. IFR lingers there, and along another disturbance working through the Gulf. MVFR will be hit and miss across some parts of the central sections of southeast, with MVFR fairly widespread across Cook Inlet, Prince William Sound, and some of the Copper Valley there. By the afternoon, conditions worsen once again across south central and southeast. You can see IFR taking over a large part of southeast from just about Sitka northward and all the way down toward Ketchikan and Annette. MVFR across the southern outer coast and a part of the Clarence Strait there. As you get into Prince William Sound, IFR should be predominant there by Tuesday afternoon, and across the Yukon Delta into Norton Sound, with parts of Nome and the Seward Peninsula back under IFR conditions, as well as the Chukchi Coast. MVFR hit and miss now across the Bering, but also lingering over Unalaska and Dutch Harbor. Here's your individual pass conditions as we look at Anaktuvuk Pass and Adigan Pass. We expect to see VFR to IFR conditions predominantly as we go through your day there. Looks like conditions will be worsening there, and again could get worse again on Tuesday, as we saw. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass start out at MVFR but lean over toward IFR conditions as your day goes on. For Rainy Pass and for Windy Pass, similar conditions that start at MVFR back over toward IFR as the day goes on Monday. For Isabel Pass, the start around marginal conditions should be expected. IFR will set in a little bit more in the afternoon, and further east, Mentasta Pass at this point looking pretty good. VFR conditions should prevail. Tanita Pass also looking for VFR to MVFR as we get into your Monday afternoon. Portage Pass, IFR conditions should start your day with MVFR developing and improving, but there is a risk of IFR lingering across Prince William Sound, of course, so watch for that throughout the day. Chilkoot and White Pass at this point look to be mainly IFR as you go through your Monday there. Perhaps some improvements there as we saw on Tuesday. On to freezing levels, the 2,000-foot freezing line will be sneaking up over the Barren Islands and into Lake Iliamna and south toward Kodiak Island. The surface freezing line out west taking a jog northward thanks to the strong southerly push we had. And you can see the warmer air wrapping into the eastern Gulf anywhere from 4,000 to 6,000 feet across the outer coast, and some parts of the central and southern Panhandle there will also get into that warming there if you're flying through that region. Icing potential is generally above 2,000 to about 4,000 feet for a large part of northern and western Alaska. A little bit higher out in the east, as you would expect, with the warm air we just saw working its way northward. We'll list that as above 7,000 feet, and at least isolated moderate across south central, southwest, west interior, and the north slope, with some pockets of icing out over the open waters of the Gulf. Here's your jet stream. High pressure sitting across the west coast now. This is allowing a large trough to develop across the Bering and send southerlies up into the Gulf. Another push of wind coming across the north slope at 60 to 65 knots. At 9,000 feet, a broad southerly flow, 50 to 60 knots across the Gulf. South and westerlies over southwest Alaska, and low pressure across the YK Delta, drawing in northeasterly winds across the west coast. You see similar results here. Wind speeds up to 25 to 40 knots from the east over the north slope, and south and southwesterlies over the Gulf anywhere from 40 to 60 knots. A much stronger southwesterly flow coming into Bristol Bay at 50 to 60 knots, and southerlies over the interior at 20 knots. So turbulence is certainly an issue as we get into your Monday. Below 6,000 feet for South Central. Don't be surprised for some isolated severe across Prince William Sound on the Kenai Peninsula. Below 4,000 for Bristol Bay, and for southeast, considerable moderate will be widespread, as well as parts of the central and western interior. Welcome to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and joining us once again is our good friend Eric Stevens from GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska. Thanks again for joining us, Eric. We really appreciate it, as always.
Happy to be here, Dave.
Thanks. And, you know, we're going to ask you some more satellite questions here, but, you know,
Okay.
Since you're a regular guest, we're going to give you a riddle this time, kind of a trick start to the show.
Okay.
How do you see a polar bear in a snowstorm?
Sounds like a challenging question because
Okay.
the polar bear is white and the snowstorm's white.
Yeah.
How do you do that? Well, in the world of satellite meteorology, you couldn't, because the spatial resolution of this instrument that we're going to talk about today has 375 meters resolution, and even the most well-fed polar bear will not be 375 meters across.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to run into such a
No, it'd be a
creature,
bad day.
would you? In the satellite meteorology world, the equivalent would be, how do you tell the difference between clouds and then an area that has no clouds but's covered by snow,
Right.
a piece of ocean that has no clouds but has sea ice?
Oh.
All three of these are white. The
Right.
snow, the clouds, the sea ice, it's all white. So how, using satellite data, can you tell someone where the clouds are and where the clear areas are? This is important for aviators. Mariners want to know, in the ocean there, this white stuff, is that sea ice or is that just a cloud?
Right.
How do we tell the difference? And it turns out, if you look, say, at a picture of Alaska from the springtime, March or April, and it's high noon, so we're getting a lot of sunshine. If you were riding on a satellite with your human eye, look down, everything's white.
Right.
And we've got a picture of Alaska from early April, and we're seeing some of the lower elevations in south central Alaska are melting out, getting some brown ground there, but otherwise there's a whole lot of white on the image. What areas are cloudy, but what areas are clear and covered by snow or ice?
Okay.
It turns out that if we leave the visible spectrum behind a little bit, see, a satellite has multiple channels in the electromagnetic spectrum that it can look at.
Oh, okay.
Part of that's visible light, what we
Right.
see as humans, but there's a lot going on at other wavelengths. If we add in something that's called near infrared, what we couldn't quite see, but we're getting into that infrared territory, there's a magical property that we can exploit.
Secrets to find. Okay.
Oh yeah, this is actually powerful and almost magical, that at a slightly longer wavelength, when the sun shines down on Alaska and then it bounces off back to the satellite, at that near infrared wavelength, it turns out that snow and ice will absorb that wavelength, but liquid water, like liquid droplets in a cloud, will reflect it back.
Okay.
And that's not the way it works in visible. You know, visible, it just bounces off of all those targets the same. But at near infrared, snow and ice absorbs it, and the liquid will reflect it back. Liquid cloud droplets will do that.
Okay.
And so an image where everything looks white suddenly becomes colorful.
Oh,
And the way this recipe works is that the clouds look pink, and the snow-covered ground and the ice-covered ocean look blue. Suddenly now, we're able to see the polar bear in the snowstorm. We're able to see where the clouds are and where the snow is and where the ice is. This is a powerful advantage. Consider the case zooming into the Bering Strait area. What if you were asked to brief a pilot who wanted to fly, say, from Kotzebue down to Savunga or Gamble, and had to fly VFR, visual flight rules, so they had to stay out of the clouds? Could you use a satellite image where everything is white to provide that pilot any guidance?
It'd be pretty tricky.
Very tricky. And that's why we have to go to this other recipe where the all-white polar bear in the snowstorm becomes more colorful. And now we can tell the pilot, aha, this is a cloud you want to stay out of, but over here, sure, it looks white in the visible spectrum, but what we're doing, we'll show you, oh, this is just snow-covered ground, but it's clear, so you can fly right through there, visual flight rules. Same thing for a mariner who might want to get down to St. Lawrence Island, say, but has to avoid the sea ice. This product has applicability there as well.
Wonderful.
It's an amazing new technology, so many new channels The satellite that makes this imagery actually has 22 different channels that it looks at.
22 secret decoder rings.
22 secret decoder rings.
Okay. You know, I liken this to an activity I had in the car when I was growing up. We go on long car rides, and we do all the work in these activity books to, you know, stay calm, cool, and collected for our parents who are trying to get us across the state. But to get the answer, the real answer, you had to apply that red sheet to see the answer or the secret path or whatever the message was in that activity book to get you onto the next page. And it's also like a photography filter, right? If you're taking a lot of pictures, you can apply different colors to see different parts of that image. I mean, that sounds a lot like what you're talking about.
Oh, you know it. The information is in there all along. We just have to combine the channels in a way to reveal what's in there. And by the way, you're dating yourself. So you didn't have an iPad in the back of the car?
No, sir.
Okay. Well, we have, lastly, for dessert, there's a great image of the same kind of recipe. We're looking at South Central Alaska the first week of January. In first week of January, the sun, even at noon, is really low on the horizon, barely up. And in this image, the fun thing is the shadow of Denali. We can see the shadow of Denali over a lower pink cloud deck.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And Denali at 20,000 feet casts a big shadow. So this is another, just for fun, kind of application here. This is called multispectral satellite imagery, and it's the future. And happily, the future is now.
Oh, that is fascinating. And 22 different secrets that can be revealed from just one satellite tool that's floating overhead. Eric, thanks so much for joining us again. We can't wait to have you back and telling us more secrets of satellite technology that are passing over us every single day, many times a day, over Alaska and helping us all the way in many different parts of our lives. So thanks so much for joining us again.
Well, happy to be here.
All right. And thank you for staying with us. We'll be back with a little more weather here in just a few minutes. And of course, we'll have more Alaska weather facts anytime online.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Now time for a quick check of your sea ice edge. With broad easterlies sweeping across the coastal plain, this will continue to push ice off and away from the coast and then fill that in along the coast, so pack ice will be growing. You can see it's still fairly solid across the Beaufort Sea and expanding westward across the Chukchi Sea. We expect this to continue. Looks like Norton Sound now has filled in fairly well. If you haven't been paying attention the last couple days, that's a relatively new trend there. And across the Yukon Delta all the way down toward Nunivak Island, additional ice is forming around parts of Southwest, and we still have ice in Cook Inlet. For the very latest information and your sea ice outlook, you can head to weather.gov/Anchorage/ice. Gales are listed across most of outer coasts of southeast today. For the inner channels there, gusts are also going to be fairly high. One impact with the front coming in is winds will be coming up as we get into the next 12 hours or so, so watch for that. Southwesterlies or southeasterlies, I should say, in Stevens Passage, we'll be gusting up to 45 miles per hour. Getting too excited just thinking about it already. 5-foot seas around there, 7-foot seas around the Lynn Canal, and southerlies in Clarence Strait. 6-foot seas with a 35-knot wind from the south. Much stronger winds across the northern Gulf, 40 knots there, with 29-foot seas expected on Monday. Look for a southeasterly flow to come up the outer coast on Tuesday. Still gusty winds inside on the passages there, winds up to 40 knots. 5-foot seas and southeasterlies with gusts to 35 knots in Clarence Strait, and northerlies back in the Lynn Canal, 20 knots with a 4-foot sea there on Tuesday. Across South Central, a storm warning outside of Prince William Sound in the northern Gulf for tonight. Conditions will still stay windy as we head into tomorrow. Southerlies 45 knots with seas anywhere from 28 to 33 feet. Southeasterlies inside 9-foot seas with 35-knot winds. The storm warning there tonight as well, obviously improving for tomorrow. And south and westerlies coming up Cook Inlet, the strongest of which will be west of the Barrens at 50 knots with a 16-foot sea for tomorrow. As we get into Tuesday, reverse course, north and northeasterly winds coming down Cook Inlet, easterlies across the Barrens at 20 knots, and we're looking at our strongest winds now outside of Prince William Sound in the northern Gulf with 17-foot seas there and a 40-knot wind. And winds come down inside of Prince William Sound, 30 knots though, still holding strong from the east with a 6-foot sea on Tuesday. For the Shelikof Strait region, 50 knots with 20-foot seas, also looking for 29-foot seas east of Kodiak Island as we get into Monday. South and westerlies on either side of Alaska Peninsula, 30 to 40 knots with 15-foot seas inside of Bristol Bay, 13-foot seas down the coast on the Pacific side, and much improved conditions as we get into Tuesday. South and easterly winds across Kodiak Island, 2 to 10-foot seas, south and southeasterlies across the Alaska Peninsula with 6-foot seas back in Bristol Bay as we wrap up your Tuesday. For Monday in the Aleutians, a west and southwesterly flow the further east you go, 25 to 30 knots there in most areas, 16 to 18-foot seas in the west. You're looking at 15 to 16-foot seas across the central chain, 17 and 19-foot seas there from Nikolsky out toward Atka. And then a southwesterly flow brings 12 to 13-foot seas across the eastern chain on a 25-knot wind on Monday. Winds really start to die off there as we get into Tuesday. A northwesterly flow 10 to 20, seas ranging from 9 to about 14 feet, and northwesterlies out in the western chain 10 to 11-foot seas on a 15 to 20-knot wind. For the west coast, on Monday, look for northerlies coming down over the ice in some cases, 25 knots from the northeast over Norton Sound. Southeasterlies light for St. Paul and St. George, 11-foot seas there. And northwesterlies a little bit stronger inside of the Kuskokwim Bay, 35 knots with a 12-foot sea on Monday. Becoming more southerly, 20 knots and 7-foot seas on Tuesday. South and easterly winds north of Hooper Bay with an 8-foot sea, and southeasterlies over the ice continue for Norton Sound. And for the North Slope, heavy freezing spray still an issue there, especially since it's mainly open water. Freezing spray will bring 35 knots up to 9 feet there. Look for northeasterlies at Cape Lisburne around Point Hope, 12-foot seas expected, and northeasterlies outside of the Kotzebue Sound region, 30 knots with a 10-foot sea, and east and northeasterlies over the Beaufort Sea. Those should improve as we get into Tuesday, becoming more of a northeasterly and 15-knot wind. Southeasterlies out of Kotzebue Sound, 25 knots with an 8-foot sea, and also looking for southeasterly winds with 8-foot seas around St. Lawrence Island on Tuesday. Recapping tonight's weather, low pressure remains strong. Just north and west of Kodiak Island at 970 millibars. A frontal boundary is working northward, northeastward, and towards southeastern Alaska. When this moves into southeast, you'll notice the winds coming up sharply tonight. Winds are going to stay strong across the Alaska Range. A high wind warning remains in effect from now all the way until Tuesday, where winds could be gusting anywhere from 65 to 75 miles per hour. Across the west, blowing snow will be an issue for the north coast, and for the west coast, add in a chance for some light snow to continue through the next couple days. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
There are many ways to give to this station, but the easiest way is